The royal guard stood motionless, his stoic face unreadable, his gloved hand gripping the ceremonial sword. Tourists laughed, posed for pictures, and tested his patience. But beneath the stiff uniform and disciplined silence, his mind was screaming. He knew something no one else did, and if he dared to speak, the world would never see the royal family the same way again. Elliott Carter wasn't born into privilege. He was the son of a struggling single mother who worked 3 jobs just to keep a roof over their heads. As a child, he would stare at Buckingham Palace on TV, mesmerized by the grandeur and the unwavering soldiers standing guard. To him, they were untouchable, invincible. Determined to rise above his hardships, Elliott trained relentlessly, pushing himself beyond limits. When he was finally selected as a royal guard, he thought he had achieved his greatest dream. But behind the polished buttons and perfectly pressed uniform, life as a guard was grueling. The discipline was merciless. The silence was suffocating. And then, there was that night. It happened on a stormy evening. Elliott was stationed outside the palace when he noticed a shadow moving unnaturally across the courtyard. At first, he dismissed it as nothing, but his instinct screamed otherwise. Something was off. Then he saw her, a frail elderly woman in tattered clothes, soaking wet from the rain. She shouldn't have been there. No one without clearance could get past the gates. She shuffled toward him, her hands trembling. Elliott's training told him to remain still, to ignore anything that wasn't a direct order. But something in her eyes, something so familiar, stopped him from looking away. She whispered, "You look just like him." His heart slammed against his chest. "Who?" Her lips quivered. "Your father." Elliott's breath caught in his throat. His father had abandoned him before he was even born. His mother had never spoken his name. Yet this woman, this stranger, knew something he didn't. Breaking protocol, Elliott moved. Just a single step. But it was enough to let the woman know he was listening. She hesitated, then reached into her soaked coat and pulled out an old, worn photograph. It was a younger version of her, smiling, standing beside a man in a Royal Guard uniform. The same uniform Elliott wore now. "My son. I've looked for him for years," she whispered. "He disappeared before he even knew I existed." Elliott felt like the ground had been ripped from under him. His mother had told him his father left because he didn't want them. But this woman, his grandmother, had spent her life searching for a missing son, a son who had vanished without a trace, a son who had worn the same uniform Elliott wore now. Elliott's pulse pounded. He wanted to speak, to ask, to know. But duty held him prisoner. If he moved any further, if he spoke even a word, he would lose everything. Yet, how could he stand still when his own blood stood before him, drenched in rain, desperate for answers? The next day, Elliott made the hardest decision of his life. He resigned. Breaking years of tradition, he walked away from the Royal Guard, but not in disgrace. He walked away in search of truth. If his father had disappeared under suspicious circumstances, someone knew the answer. Months of searching led Elliott to old records, forgotten files, and finally, a retired guard who had served alongside his father. The truth was chilling. His father had uncovered something dangerous about an internal scandal. He had tried to expose it, but was silenced, erased from history. His disappearance wasn't abandonment. It was a cover-up. And now Elliott had the chance to set things right. Years later, Elliott became a journalist, exposing corruption hidden beneath institutions of power. His story shook the nation, inspiring others to speak out against injustice. One day, as he walked past Buckingham Palace, he saw the Royal Guard standing as he once did, silent, unwavering. And then one guard, just for a fleeting second, made eye contact with him and nodded. The unbreakable silence had finally spoken.